Hi, I'm Chris Bensted from the Driving Instructor and Trainers Collective, the DITC.co.uk, signposting point for the industry, where you can come to find information that you're not sure where to look for it. That's what we do. I am also a specialist theory trainer and I run Theory Test Explained, supporting your pupils who are struggling with the theory test, helping them to understand the way the test works and the questions, have the knowledge, be able to pass, and then help stop them holding you up because they can't book or take their practical test. So that's what I do. If you want to find me via theditc.co.uk or hit me up on Facebook and we can have a chat. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. For those of you who are joining us right on time, we're going to start the session in a couple of moments' time, just allowing a few of you to get in and get logged on properly. Thanks so much for so many of you joining us tonight. I know it was a very last minute invite for this session, but we couldn't let the opportunity to go pre-election to have a chat amongst some of the industry stalwarts I've got with me tonight about the big changes we would like to see any new order bring into being when they're elected. So I'll just let you all get comfortable and then I will introduce everybody. Whilst you are kind of coming in and starting to settle down for tonight's session, just be having a think yourselves around the big things that you would want to see any new government or the existing government, but with a new cabinet probably, because inevitably a shuffle if the reigning party managed to crawl back in again. So just have a think about what kind of things that you would like to see be the big changes, and that cannot just be new things being done, new developments. That could be things you want stopping doing and things we want to stop doing or change. So yes, have a think about that. And right on cue, as I said to my colleagues here, the dog would start barking as soon as I started the webinar with no one in the house. There is every door open in the house, but he's going blind, so he can't necessarily see his way out through the open doorways. All right, so I think I'm going to make a start. Good evening to everybody who's joined us. I'm Carly Brookfield. I'm Chief Executive of Driving Instructors Association. This session is called Motormouth because it's not like our webinars where we do a more educative thing and give people a little bit of learning about a specific subject. Motormouth is exactly what it sounds like. It's a session where we get deep and dirty with some discussion on some key hot topics that are affecting our industry right now. And one of those hot topics that is clearly going to affect our industry, not that it ever gets much mentioned in the manifestos of the political parties, is, what should any new government be thinking about in terms of driver and rider training, testing, and licensing? And what should we actually hope to see in any manifestos of the political parties in the lead up to that election? The campaign points should really focus on this area of road safety, which is what driver and rider training is trying to achieve. But very little do we ever see in any party's manifesto on this topics. Drawing from the survey that we're running on this manifesto topic at the moment and drawing from your views and opinions tonight, we will be building a manifesto document that we'll be sending to all political parties that focuses in on what are the key things we would like to see done or achieved or even discussed or consulted on by any of the new parties that may win this election. So I'm going to stop waffling now and let my esteemed guests actually join me tonight. I'm joined by fellow regular panellist Chris Bensted, who will go through his credentials in a moment. With me, I also have Chief Motorcycle Examiner for DIA, which is Mark Jaffe. I'm joined by arguably the elder, and he won't mind me saying that, statesman of the industry, which is Peter Harvey from Motor Schools Association, and Kevin Chippendale Higgins, who is a very experienced ADI and is actually running as a candidate in this election himself. So, Peter, I'm going to give you the floor first to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Carly, and thank you for inviting me along. Good evening to all the people that are listening to us. As Carly said, my name is Peter Harvey. I'm the Vice Chairman for the Motor Schools Association. I've been a driving instructor for 40-something years, that's it, that's all I'm going to tell you. At the moment, I'm the current Chairman for NASP, where Carly and ADI, NJC and ourselves all work together and present towards DVSA, DFT, and all sorts of other places. I'm happy to hand over to Carly now.
Or Mark's next in my view on the
Yep.
window. So let's Mark next.
Good. Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Jaffe. I'm the motorcycle lead for the DIA. I work on a number of DFT motorcycle strategy groups with the DVSA and the DIA and the DFT in terms of focusing the future policies within motorcycle training. I also run. I'm a fully qualified motorcycle instructor as well. And I run 25 training schools throughout the UK as my part-time job.
Brilliant. And down to Chris next.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris Bensted. I recently keep being called an industry commentator, so I think that means gob on a stick. But I also
don't be coming for my
but I'm the second loudest person in the room when Carly's here. And I also run the Driving Instructor and Trainers Collective signposting platform for the industry. I've been a driving instructor for over 16 years. I'm an audit trainer for what that's worth. We might discuss that tonight. And I am a theory training specialist. I've given up my car now to focus on theory.
Which makes you quite a unique beast, to be fair, doesn't it?
Yeah, long may it last.
And Kevin, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, good evening, everybody. My name is Kevin Chippendall-Higgin. I've been an ADI for about 13 years. I've got many of the DIA qualifications, which have been incredibly useful and helpful over the years. I'm also the candidate for the Reform Party, Reform UK, in Ferrum and Waterlooville. And I'm up against Suella Braverman, who some of you might have heard of.
Just a little bit. Okay, just a bit of housekeeping before we start for the people who are joining us tonight. We have a chat function in your bottom or top toolbar for Zoom, depending on how your view is laid out. If you want to put any ideas, thoughts, or feedback that you have in that particular chat bar, I will pick those up and share them with the panelists. If you have any specific questions, pop those in the Q&A function so I can pick those up there. So I'll dance between those two boxes whilst these guys dance around the ring and have a bit of a scrap maybe. That'll be exciting on some of the things we're going to be talking about tonight. So thank you for all of that. I'm going to go around the houses again just to get things started and ask each of you for two major changes that you would like to see, or two major developments or achievements of any next government when it relates to our world, and our world being, embracing the wider ranges of training, rider training and everything. So Peter, again, kicking off with you, what are the two big things that you would like to see change?
Carly, I suppose one of the major things I would like to see, and maybe just a little controversial, would be that we do away with the driving test the way it is just now. It can't be. I think we should stop this tick boxing situation where we say someone has done something wrong, and that's a reason to fail. I think we should try to look at it, or my hope would be that we try to look at the driving test in a more holistic view. We look at an overall picture of the driving test, like we do in some other styles of driving assessments. Have a look at how the person drives. Should we really fail that person because they forgot to check the mirror at that particular time if it didn't affect anybody else? Those kind of things. And I suppose there's quite a few of them, but the other thing that I would like to do is have a situation where we could have a sensible talk with politicians about removing regulation around a lot of the things we do in our life. As you well know, Carly, and I'm sure some of the rest of you know as well, when we deal with politicians, or we deal with DVSA, let's talk about DVSA. We deal with DVSA, often the answer we get is the politician says no. Sometimes the politician can't even drive, never mind tell us how we do our job. So that would be a very big thing in my list, to try and get the regulations and changed to help run the whole driving test safety system much better and easier for everybody that's in it to be able to work within the rules rather than trying to bend the rules all the time. That would be my two initially. I've got more later if we need them, but that would be my two.
Thanks, Peter. Mark, what would your two big things be?
Yeah, well, my two big things would be to at least work through some of the consultations that we've had in the rider training industry over the last 6 or 7 years. My two top ones, I guess, are to introduce automatic and manual CBTs as part of compulsory basic training. Because at the moment, if you pass your compulsory basic training on an automatic, you're able to ride a manual bike as well. Unfortunately, that gives a lot of some of the less thorough training organisations the opportunity to only teach on autos, and then it's often left for people to go out and try and work out what to use on the gears once they've gone and bought a bike. So that will be certainly one of my big hits. The other one is to look at the changes to progressive access, and this is to develop earned recognition status within the training industry for those schools that are proved to be way above the others, and potentially look at them using the training option to move up our graduated driving licensing through what we call progressive access, rather than having to just go back and do the module 1 and the module 2 tests every time they want to move up a license category. So those two would be my big hits: automatic and or manual only CBTs, and the introduction of earned recognition status to enable progressive access through training rather than just testing again. Thanks,
Mark. Mr. Bensted.
So I had a list of 26 points that I had to drum down. So the first one is the code 78, which is the automatic restriction on the driving license. I think that's the biggest risk to driver training businesses. As a small business, it's probably the biggest investment we have, biggest decision we have, and we don't know what the future plans are at all. Everyone says, it's on the table, they're aware of it, but no one's saying anything. If they were to get rid of it, overnight, which we know that often happens, there's going to be a lot of driving schools affected. We need to be informed to be able to make better choices and decisions. And I wouldn't be surprised if it did happen overnight, when whatever it is happens. That would be my first one. And then I'm going to go straight in on audit. It either needs to be compulsory and worthwhile or scrapped, and I'm not that bothered which. I think we need to do something, and at the moment I don't think it's worthwhile. I say that as an audit trainer, because you've got to be in it for them to actually talk to us and listen to us. So not that they do, but if they choose to, you've got to have the badge.
Kevin, over to you.
Well, yeah, I've had a rather sort of cold list, as you well imagine. I would like to see a ban on learner riders riding professionally. Got a full motorcycle license, or you can't deliver pizzas. End of. I would also like to see a proper theory education program. This whole idea of multiple guests, as I actually wrote to Mark earlier on today, I don't know if you received that email, Mark, but it's very much a case of what's the traditional British breakfast: bacon and eggs. Congratulations, you passed. By the way, what does an egg look like? I have no idea. So there's no depth of knowledge. It's just a tick box exercise, and it drives me absolutely potty. I could talk about road safety. I could talk about casualty stats. I could talk about research I've done in France with their ambulance service, and that's a bit of an eye opener. But I'm only allowed two, so there you are.
We can get back to the other stuff later on. So yeah, thanks for that gentleman. That was really interesting. I must say, I agree with Peter, particularly on one of my big things that I would like to see is not necessarily one single policy development. It's actually about looking at how we can change that primary legislation that allows DVSA officials and DFT and upwards to minister to say no to development, because they always use it as an excuse for, well, we can't do anything with that because we'd have to change primary legislation. And as we know, and as Chris is alluding to, things like that can actually change overnight where there is a want. And, you know, so we would like to see a more, you know, enthusiastic attempt at trying to either look at the current legislation and see where it could be flexed to achieve change, because I don't believe what is there at the moment, what can see of it, doesn't allow any change. Though if you speak to somebody from DVSA about change, they'll say, no, the legislation doesn't allow us to do that, so no point even having the conversation. But where it doesn't allow change, okay, so let's change legislation so it can allow more change and more development as we learn more about what needs to be done to help somebody be a safe driver or rider over time. So I think that's something I definitely want to see. I would like us to see as well revisiting the entire pre-test training regime. And obviously at DIA, we're very interested at the moment in looking at how a modular program could be introduced, more e-learning used as we emerge into a world where people are doing more e-learning. But also I'd like us to actually get done what we talked about as an industry in 2013, 2012, Peter, where we looked at modernizing driver training, i.e. modernizing the way that we train people to become a driving instructor in the first place, or a rider trainer. And you know, that in itself was a good principle, the idea of looking at how we could do that. But as with many things, it fell by the roadside, which is a shame, because if we ever expect a different result in our drivers and riders, it's only ever going to be achieved if we aim for different results in terms of how we qualify and license our driver and rider trainers. So those are the kind of big changes I would like to see there. But just flipping to the to some of the responses from the delegates tonight, you know, some of the things that people would like to see changed to help wider road safety is having lots more traffic police, so lots more enforcement able to go on, and that would be important in one factor in terms of some of the things that we are seeing in the manifesto lobbying documents we're seeing from other road safety bodies are about graduated licensing and wanting graduated licensing to one things the next government brings in. But one of the problems of that would be enforcement. That would be one of the challenges. So obviously more officers on the road enforcing on all areas of driving safety would be great, but that would be one of the big challenges of GDL. Controversially, but if you're a PDI, this gentleman as well said no one allowed to work on a provisional license, including delivery riders. Oh, no, not controversial. I think we're talking about trainees then. No one allowed to work on a provisional license during delivery riders and training ADI. So, Mark, did you want to pick up on that one? Because Kevin's mentioned that one, and that's been mentioned by a delegate.
Absolutely, I will. So, as I mentioned earlier on, I'm part of the DVSA motorcycle strategy group, and as part of that strategy group, we broke into some subsections to look at various things. One of which was exactly the topic they're talking about in terms of gig riders. We've been working on this for probably about 18 months to about 2 years now, looking at what effects it would have to the delivery rider, especially the Ubers and the Deliveroos. And we've done quite a lot of investigations with Transport for London and various other organisations around this. The conclusion we've actually come to is the issue isn't with rider training and or rider testing. The reason why is when they come to us for training on CBTs, or whether they go to the DVSA to have a Module 1 or Module 2 test, they will behave themselves, because at the end of the day, they won't be riding dangerously, they won't be riding, say, irrespectively, because they know at the end of either the CBT or the Module 1 or 2 test, if they do behave in the way that they ride on deliveries, that they wouldn't get the certificate and wouldn't move on. So in reality, they tend to behave when they come along. Now, we then started looking at other reasons why delivery riders ride in the way that they do. And we started to investigate the delivery companies, the gig economy apps such as Deliveroo, such as Uber Eats, etc. And we found some very startling problems. For example, if the weather is poor and the riding conditions are really bad, their delivery rates go up. So they get paid more for delivering in wet weather and poor weather. The demand for home deliveries goes up when it's wet and it's raining, purely because we don't want to go out to the shops and we want to have our delivery as quickly as possible. The other thing that we found was, I'm sure many of you have been driven past McDonald's or one of the fast food chains and seen hundreds of, well, maybe not hundreds, certainly tens of bikes outside waiting. Well, they're all quite busy, but what they're doing is they're working between themselves and they're rejecting all of the delivery jobs that come in. When the delivery price then goes up because they got a lack of delivery riders, they all suddenly click on 1, 2, or 3 delivery apps that they've got on 2, 3 phones so that they get a better rate of money for it. So the rhetoric has always been exactly as some people have said, and exactly as Kevin said, that, you know, should they be learning, should they be working for a living on a provisional license? Well, the way that the strategy group have worked this through is it's not actually driver or rider training or testing that's the problem. The problem is the way that the delivery apps pay people. And at the end of the day, what are they out to do? They're out to earn as much money as possible. And they're working with WhatsApp groups between themselves, rejecting jobs so that the delivery prices go up. It's the same with Uber cabs. You know, if you get an Uber cab at 8 o'clock in the morning, your trip will be £40 because there aren't any cars around. As soon as you get to after the school run, the prices drop down to £18 because there's more
Supply.
more Ubers, more cars available. Exactly the same thing is happening within the rider delivery market, and it's not the training and testing that's causing them to ride in the way that some of them do. Because if they did, they wouldn't pass or wouldn't get through. It's purely about money, and it's purely about them working the system between themselves to get the best value or get the best amount of money for each delivery. The other problem that we have as well is that we've got lots of delivery riders signing up as a pedal cyclist, and that they are allegedly delivering using a pedal cycle, and they then go and use a moped to do that. So then CBT certificates aren't being checked. There's a massive fraud issue with dodgy CBTs because you only have to upload your CBT certificate to the delivery app, and that's very easily photoshopped. We probably get 3 or 4 phone calls a week from the traffic police saying, can you confirm this? And I've just seen somebody pop up, Graham Summers has said, so police should be more proactive. They absolutely are in where they're around. I work a lot in the London area with Transport for London and the Met Police, and they do target certain nationalities of delivery riders, and they find that we've got this issue. So part of the 2017 consultation, that was one of my 10 points that I only got to choose 2, but one of my 10s is the digitization of CBT certificates, because at the moment it's a paper written certificate which is easily up for fraud, and to some degree the issue with the delivery riders sending up false CBT certificates has actually galvanized the DVSA into setting up their own internal working group to look at how that it can digitize it to try and prevent that sort of fraud. So I totally get the rhetoric that training and testing about people working on provisional licenses, but the reality is that won't actually change the problem. all it will do is exclude from society some people that aren't able to get a full license for whatever reason, or they just want to earn a few extra quid for 3 months because that's about the average time of a delivery rider. So that, you know, this is all part of the strategy group, and this is where we have landed our research over the last 18 months. TfL has done some really good work in producing a delivery riders charter, and that's being rolled out to the delivery riders companies, the Uber Eats. Deliveroo are actually on board with it, but the others aren't. But TfL don't have the power, if you like, to insist on it. So yeah, absolutely. I'll move on from the delivery rider stuff because that was part of it.
Great, thanks, Mark, for that background on that. And I suppose what we're saying there really is we need a better regulation of the companies that are commissioning the rider, because it's about their behaviours and the fact that they're incentivizing. It's a little bit like danger money, isn't it? Go out in the wet,
Yeah.
you're going to get more money.
Yeah.
But then you've got this kind of conspiracy of riders who are, you know, driving up prices, and then that's danger money in an unwitting way by them, because actually they'll then have to do a lot of deliveries in a very short time scale because they've pumped up that demand and it's all flowing in, and that puts them at risk as occupational riders as well. Okay, I'm going to go to the and yeah, I mean, somebody said I read it wrong before about PDIs, but we can talk about the idea about, you know, skipping to driver training and the training of trainers. That, you know, do we allow people to carry on with a provisional license as a driving instructor? We'll get to that in a moment, because I'm going to go through the survey that we've been conducting on what should be in any manifesto, and we will get to the bit on the training of trainers. So for the first questions we asked in the survey is, would the respondents support the introduction of a mandatory curriculum for learning to drive? So one of the things I find when I talk to wider road safety stakeholders is they assume there is already a mandatory curriculum for learning to drive. Perhaps why they're so fond of GDL. They think that everything has been done that needs to be done to pre-test training, and we don't need to tinker it anymore. And some of them actually said to me, well, they all are exposed to the same curriculum, right? And there's a mandatory curriculum. And it's like, no, there isn't. We have national standards, we have safe driving for life syllabus, but none of those are things that are mandated for either an ADI to deliver or for a pupil to undertake and prove competency in. So I'm not surprised with the results of this. 99% of respondents actually said that they would support the introduction of a mandatory curriculum of learn to drive. What do our panelists think of that? I'm going to kick it over to Peter first.
Thank you. I have all sorts of reservations about mandatory tuition, mandatory curriculum. The thing that concerns me is, if only ADIs or only PDIs and ADIs were allowed to give training or for money or money's worth in a motor car, and that was upheld, that would be absolutely fine. But we also have a scenario where we allow lay people, what they would call in other countries, parents, guardians, to do that as well. I'm just concerned about how we ensure that if they're going to learn to drive with their parents or friends or whoever, that they won't find a way of avoiding going to the ADI to get the extra training or the guaranteed training. Just seems a bit, it's easy for people to say, yes, we'll do that. And one of the things that we have a very high percentage of people who actually go to a driving instructor anyway. And I know that's fallen a little bit since the pandemic came along, because people will take people in their own car. And especially now when they pick up tests from Testy and all these places, the instructor sensibly says, no, I'm not having that, I'm not taking you. They go in their own car. I think it's a good idea. I'm just concerned about how you would regulate that. Now, if you're asking me about GDL, I would say that's up to the government to regulate that. But I'm not sure that would be as easy as that. If every parent, whether they can afford that or not, pushes somebody into a driving school to get some sort of training. Maybe that's going to encourage more people driving illegally. Maybe not,
Okay.
but maybe.
Chris, what do you think?
I think that, there's always going to be issues with it. We've seen so many places that have tried. The one that worries me is mandatory hours rather than mandatory skills, because the second you do that, people do the minimum. It sounds brilliant. It's not going to be 100 hours. It's going to be 10. It's going to be the minimum standards industry. That's what we're in.
Responded that
So
they
what
would like
minimum?
to see, H2 survey respondents said they would like to see the introduction of a minimum number of hours. But as you say, it is that. What is that number? What is the magic number?
It'll be 10. It'll be pathetic. It won't be what we want it to be. During the wonders of lockdown and COVID, there were positives. I got to virtually meet lots of driving instructors from all over the world. I ended up with a whole little community of people moaning about the same issues. And we stole lots of stuff from other countries that was brilliant. And all of them are amazed at the amount of hours that people do with us as instructors compared to what they get when they have some kind of mandated amount. People do the minimum. They use the school of mum and dad or whoever it might be to get them up to a standard, and then the instructor becomes about test readiness, and it's very test focused. We're going to lose a lot of the things we want by asking for those other other restrictions to be in place. I think we've got to be really careful what we wish for, and I think that's the big
number, doesn't it? Even though it's a mandatory minimum, that becomes that's all the hours I've got to do to get through.
That'll become the maximum, won't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And if we do it a bit on a skill-based approach, that makes a total difference, because you've got to be achieving something. But to look at where they've done it before, Ireland took that kind of approach, saying you've got to have a certain number of assessments and show the development, and you've got to trust the people that are signing it off. There's problems there, so we need that kind of oversight. We need a system that's going to be good enough. It hasn't got to be perfect, but it's going to be good enough. And then we look at things, and I'll say it, because it hasn't been mentioned yet, but looking at the standard of the driver after the test to judge the instructors that have trained them and got them there.
But you play right into my hands there, because that's in the milestones trial. It looks at having a mandatory curriculum for the in-car sessions, which the ADI will sign off those assessments. However, there is that layer of a quality assurance, I suppose, that comes through the e-learning component that will, the pupil couldn't do brilliantly in practical training and be signed off by an ADI for everything, but then they fail every theory test in the e-learning element, because that's where you'd say, hang on a minute, something's going wrong here. We've got somebody just signing off people willy-nilly. The other alternative I suppose to look at is not necessarily a mandatory curriculum, but mandating that somebody has to learn with a professional instructor, which would be a step forward to what we have at the moment, and that they have to achieve competency in key areas and prove that. And until they've done that, they can't go through that final goalpost to the test center.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's having those things in place. Yes. And there's always going to be someone working the system. Yes. At the moment, though, we're living in this world where the restrictions we think are in place don't exist. You mustn't sell driving tests. Yeah, you can, because you shouldn't, and we it's not helpful and everything. But there's not a legislation in place to prevent it. It's a threat of fit and proper, and that's on my list. I'd like to know what fit and proper is actually in writing, please. Thank you very much.
Also, it might not even be the ADI that's selling the driving test, or the unscrupulous companies that are referenced. It could actually be a current or ex-DVSA examiner, as we have heard chat in the market has happened. So, Kevin, what do you think of this idea of mandating either a number of hours, a learning program, mandating that everybody has to learn with a professional licensed driving instructor or riding instructor, whatever they're learning? It can't just be with who they want to be with. It's got to be with someone who is licensed to carry out that role.
I would take bits of all of those, to be honest. I'm very much focused on outcomes. And what I'd like to see, to be honest, would be 5 tests, by scaring the living daylights out of everybody, You're going to have urban, you're going to have rural, you're going to have national speed limit, dual carriageway, and night. And that's not just going up and down the high street when the street lights are on. You're going around the back of the hill where it's pitch black. Your ADI will sign those off, and at that point, you then go for the ministry test just to make sure that you've covered that this person is indeed competent. They can't do the night bit because they weren't. They were saying all this time, yeah, they wanted to go out. Now, if they're really talented, they're really clever, and they're really good, and they pick it up quickly, great, they've met the standard. If they're very slow and struggling, well, eventually they're going to meet the standard. If you've got some extremely dodgy ADIs who, for a suitably well-stuffed brown envelope, will sign anything, then they're going to get hoovered up come the ministry test. What I would like to see from the point of view of theory is a proper college course, evening classes, adult education. I'm not totally smitten by the e-learning thing. You're going to go to college and you're going to learn about how the highway code works, what the lines mean, what are the implications of not keeping your car serviced, hygroscopic brake fluid, tires. Why worry about tire pressures?
So a little bit like driver's ed used to be in the States, because even though some states have phased that out, but obviously they used to have a lot more of a formal process driver education in the States.
Perhaps you should be. Now, I've got no problem with a 16-year-old passing a theory test. If they've got the knowledge and they can demonstrate the knowledge, and it's a little bit, the way I look at it is it's a little bit like when you're at school. At the end of the year or end of term, wherever it was, you had a test with your teacher mark. And if your teacher's pet, you probably got away with an awful lot. But sooner or later, you're going to hit an independent examiner. He gets a paper in front of him. He doesn't know who the hell you are, and he marks it on what he sees. We need something like that, so that the proper knowledge is imparted and the students really understand it. It's no good just having a tick box and multiple guess, because my favourite explanation is, traditional British breakfast, bacon and eggs. What does an egg look like? I haven't a clue. I have passed the test, so who cares? And these things are killing machines. They really are. Nothing else. I can't think of any other activity involving lethal machinery that is just left to a single test at 17, and that's it, happy days for as long as you live, which in many cases might not be as long as you would hope. Now, added to that, I would like to see, and this is really going to get people going, I suspect, between 18 and 24 months, you retake the ministry test. Whether it's a DIA examiner or a ministry examiner, doesn't really matter. You retake the test. And the reason for that is, rather than your dad saying, it's all right, son, when you pass it, I'll show it's really done in the real world, whereby you're simply passing ignorance on from generation to generation. They've got to maintain those standards. Otherwise, they will pass their second. They will fail their second test. After that, everybody, you, me, whoever, cops the lot, every 10 years when your license, when your card is renewed, you take an assessment. Because what we don't do is to ensure and to create an environment where what is taught in the car at learning time is actually carried on into later life. Now, we are unique in that. If you drive a forklift every 5 years, guess what? You've got to go through the whole forklift test again, which is totally over the top, ruinously expensive and completely pointless. But reassessing a forklift driver every 5 years is fine. Nobody else gets reassessed. Lorry drivers don't get reassessed. They've got to get a new license. They've got to get medical. They've got to get a new eyesight test. Nobody actually gets in the cab and says, can you actually do the job properly? And that applies to everybody. All of us. None of us have been reassessed for decades. I mean, here we have, because we take it all seriously and we do these things. But how many tens of millions of drivers are in the UK, pass test 17, happy days, nobody worries you until the day you die, maybe 70 years later, and it's only because DVLA wants its license back. So there's no continuous professional development. There's none of that at all.
And the fact remains that in terms of safety statistics, young driver casualties account for a fifth of the overall KSI.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Whereas the majority is coming from the 35 million already licensed drivers, which is me and you. You know, those of us who've been driving around for years completely unchecked. I'm going to go to the so really, I think I'm getting a feeling from all of you is that there's definitely change to be made in the pre-test system, which nicely takes me on to the next set of questions we asked in the survey. If you read, as I said, the campaign documents of other road safety bodies who are hoping to influence the manifestos of each political party in this election, they will point to graduated licensing being the silver bullet. But do we kind of agree that actually we need a holistic look? We can't say we're not going to look at post-test restrictions, but do we really feel when it comes to category B licensing, we really do need to look at what we haven't got right in the pre-test process before we even start thinking about restricting people? Because if we just slam that door when the horse has bolted, we're not really solving the real problem, which is we're not necessarily training people in the first place. And no, once the restriction is lifted 6 months down the line in most proposals, people will still struggle with the issues of not necessarily being exposed to the right training they should have been in the first place.
Agreed.
Okay, that's a nice one. I was expecting a little bit of debate on that one, but I haven't got it. Okay, so I mean, overall, what are people's feelings on restricted licensing? Do we feel that is something we would want the next government to focus on, or is it within a range of measures that they should really properly consult on in terms of changes to driver and rider education?
Yeah, go on. Sorry, you go, Chris.
All I was going to say was I wouldn't want to answer that without knowing what restricted means, because I think that's the biggest issue we have. GDL, restricted license, the phrases are such a broad thing that means something different to absolutely everyone, that until we know what that means and we've figured out what the payoff is going to be to get us there and what we're going to lose, I don't want to vote for anything.
Yeah.
Carly, I'm not sure how much people know about this, but because I've been about a long time, some of you may remember that. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Some of you may remember that way back in 2002, the government looked at introducing graduated licences. It fell at the Transport Select Committee at that time. In 2007, it was decided again to look at it in another manner. And quite a lot of good ideas were put forward. And so graduated licensing is not something new. It's something we've had or had the option to have for quite a long time. But Douglas, what was his name? Douglas Alexander, who was the minister at the time, who happened to be my local MP as well, decided to, I'm not going to say he shelved it, but he kind of did what most of them do and swept it under the carpet until nobody remembered to ask about it anymore. So there have been lots of good ideas of how it could work. My thoughts on GDL, for what it's worth, I see GDL as quite a good thing if we implement it before and after the test. I thought some of the things that was it Chris or the other gentleman had said just a few moments ago about, GDL could be done in a way that where, although it wouldn't be, it would need to be compulsory to go to a driving school for some parts, but you would get signed off on those 5 objects that I think it was Kevin that had said it in the end, wasn't it? That, you do, once you get to a certain stage, you have to get that signed off. We almost had signing off of manoeuvres at one time, not all that long ago. We had almost had signing off of manoeuvres. And in the end, the government of the day decided, and I'll be blunt about it, they didn't trust driving instructors enough to do it, because many driving instructors did all sorts of dodgy things. And Pass Plus was the start of that, where somebody suggested earlier, people were signing off documents when people weren't doing it. And unfortunately, we move forward, and in the training license world, we know that there are people out there that sign documents, and the PDI accepts that to happen. And I never understand why anyone would let that happen when they've paid all that money to learn to do it, and they just sign it because somebody said it's okay. And it's our side of the fence that needs to get policed more, However, we think about might doing that to stop that kind of thing happening. Because as long as we have that reputation, you and I both know, Carly, getting and Chris as well. Sorry, getting past that with any government is going to be a mountain to climb. Because
I think you just nicely played into my hands there, Peter, because I was actually going to segue for the final, kind of 15 minutes or so of this session into it's this whole chicken and egg thing, isn't it? But it isn't the chicken and egg, because really, I think we're all in agreement here that one of the areas we need to tinker with the most is the qualification of the trainers themselves, isn't it? That's where if we don't improve that, how do we expect? It's a bit about Einstein's definition of madness. If we don't keep the same things, we're not going to get a different result. So if we don't,
the thing that's crazy to me, we have so many people fail part one as well, but we have so many people fail part two, then eventually go through for a part three. If they can't drive, they're never going to be able to put driving into words. Even if we've done nothing else but turn the system around where they have to pass the part two before they can go any further, maybe that would be a major contribution from our side of the industry. I see Mark's got his hand up there. I'll leave you to
so
deal with that.
it's worth saying to everybody, in case you think we just sit around and drink tea and eat biscuits in NAS meetings, we did actually ask for two special meetings ahead of PERDA about 6 months ago now, and one of them was to focus on overhauling the ADI qualification, which is something we've been pushing out for NAS for a long while, and we started going through it, didn't we, and saying, well, why can't you, we were like the 5-year-olds in the room, why can't you do something different with part two? Why can't you do something with part one? Because although you said you can't change the fact we have to do parts 1, 2 and 3, surely you can do something better with what's in those part 1, 2 and 3 to make sure they're better gateposts. And also, if you're having this massive rise in applications and you're struggling to deal with just the administration of that, shouldn't you have better gateposts in place in terms of what you allow in terms of applications and the quality of people coming through? And as you just said there, if we did part 2 first, we'd probably screen out some people who are never going to make it as quality driver trainers anyway.
And as we all know, we had a trial system in place where there was a kind of selection system where you're going to actually be able to be a driving instructor. And once again, a minister come along and said, no, that's not fair on small businesses, people trying to start a new business, all those kind of things. But eventually, we have to say, we have to put something into place that makes our side of the industry better. And hopefully that produces the better drivers, whether it's a holistic test or whatever. They still need to be trained, but they need to be trained properly. And we keep telling people that we have national standards, but if instructors don't actually stick to them, and I know a lot of them do, it's not fair to criticise all of them, but a lot of them will find a way around about it. And that's the bit that annoys me, because we really can't do anything about that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mark.
Yeah, sorry, I ended up dropping out for a few moments ago, so I do apologise if I've missed some of what Peter was saying. But in motorcycling, we already have graduated licensing. So with the introduction of the third driving licence directive in 2013, you're restricted from 17. It goes up to a 500cc, and then at 24 you can then ride unrestricted. So we already have that within the motorcycle area as well.
But we've moved on to sorry, Mark.
Sorry.
So we moved on to now. That's really useful. But what
no, go on.
What you were saying was very interesting before. We've now moved on to, and again, I think you're slightly more advanced than us in the rider training world than we are in the ADI world. We're now moving on to, what should the training of trainers look like? Because if we don't get that right, we can't expect a good product in terms of the pupils that we train. So, in the rider training world, do you think you've already got somewhat farther than we have in terms of qualifying rider trainers versus how we qualify ADIs?
Yes, I think we actually do, because within rider training we have another level. So as a motorcycle instructor, you cannot deliver training to a student. You have to work for an approved training body, an ATB, and it's only the approved training body that can deliver rider training using an instructor. Now we've got obviously our the same as the ADIs, the 4-year lead driver DVSA standards checked. But in legislation, we have to standards check every single motorcycle trainer every 3 months. So 4 times a year, they have to have an internal standards check by the approved training body. So we've already got a lot more rider instructor training going on by internal standards checks. Now, yeah, again, the good schools do that properly and do proper standards checks. And maybe some of the other smaller ATBs don't do it as rigorously, but it is in legislation, and the DVSA, as part of their compliance checks, will come and look for your training records every 3 months for every instructor. So we've already got that extra level. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's certainly more than you have in the driver training world.
So do we? So listening to that, does the rider trainers are already overtaking the ADIs in terms of the rigor there. So I think we're in broad agreement that we do need to look at the training of trainers and really shake that up to some degree, because it's not just in terms of the quality output, it's in terms of the knowledge output. Because one of the things we asked in the survey as well is, if you were to completely redevelop an ADI qualification, what would be the kind of missing bits that we haven't got at the moment? And actually, there's quite a lot of missing bits, really, if you think about it. But some of the respondents said that, in terms of thinking about what you actually need as a modern trainer, things like safeguarding, training pupils with diverse needs, teaching and learning strategies, risk management. There's a whole host of things that people can think of at the top of their head that aren't there in the current ADI qualification, that the gaps, and that alone would give rise to the thought that we need to shake things up, right?
I don't think so.
Yeah, and you didn't mention business skills in that list, which I would also add.
Absolutely. Exactly. We're not training. If you look at other vocational training areas from my time in further education colleges, even back in the day, things like leisure and hospitality management and sports management courses had a business element, thinking that people wouldn't necessarily just go straight into being employed by somebody else, that they might be setting up as a professional trainer, a personal trainer, or they might be setting up their own outfit. So yeah, definitely business skills has to be in there. But again, going back to it's not just the curriculum, is it? It's the quality of the person doing the training of the trainers. That even if we came up with a great curriculum, it's actually making sure that the people who are delivering it are doing their job, because we don't really have that faith, by the sounds of it, as an industry, necessarily in the trainers that we've got. The system kind of allows people to not do a very good job.
Certainly, maybe one of the things we need to consider is how we train driving instructors. I have a lot of sympathy with what Chris had to say earlier on about audit, and that probably sounds a bit odd from me, because I spent a lot of time, as you well know, trying to make sure that audit was going to be revamped and done in a different way. But the unfortunate thing is, I don't think the industry have any confidence in audit at all. They still see it as the old way, how things worked. If you look at places like even Greece, for instance, to become a driving instructor in Greece, you have to do a 2-year university course before you can become a driving instructor. Belgium, it's a 1-year university course before you can become a driving instructor. Now, their stats don't say they're any better at producing good drivers than we are. But it just seems that our way of doing it is far too lax for people coming into the system. They see it as an easy way of earning money, rather than this is going to be a profession for the rest of my life. And if I was a teacher, I would have to do this, that, and other. Right now, we don't have a structure for that to happen. And for me, I think that's something you and me and anybody else sitting around the table has to fight to make that. I know a lot of ADIs won't like that, but if you're already an ADI, you're in the system, you just have to make sure you're good enough to stay in it. And I'm not sure the standards check's a way to do that either. But that's maybe a conversation for another show, if you like.
I think the problem is that we don't have a good enough criteria for audit or to become an ADI trainer. The audit is not strong enough, and it isn't mandatory. So in a way, why does it exist? And so we don't really have and because that doesn't really have any teeth and people aren't required to become an audit trainer, they can't set a criteria and they can't apply a criteria in our world. So the thing that I would like to
sorry, Carly. And the problem recently, ADI treat it with the same contempt, because all of a sudden that's one of the things they dropped. And if you were really intent in making sure that people were going to be good and qualified and well qualified, for me, I would have kept that going. I would have said, right, we have 2 examiners that are only going to do audit. And I know that would have affected the L test a little bit, but why would you take that away when that's the one thing you want everybody to do?
Especially as you're in a perfect storm moment. We have the biggest demand for trainee licenses ever. You know, we've got, what was it, like 4,000 new entrants to the industry in the first quarter of this year. So if ever there was a time to improve the way that we train trainers and improve the training standards of the trainers, it is when you've got the biggest amount of new people entering the industry. And that was, and unfortunately, it collided with the time they had no resources to do that. But it makes it more and more pivotal to the development of driver education that we educate the educators, right? Yeah. And it's a bit of a ludicrous situation if you really look at it, that we say to people, you've been ADI for 6 months? Do you fancy going and imparting your vast knowledge and wisdom and experience to someone else and charging them a lot of money for that? Off you go. Doesn't matter that you haven't really got that much experience on the ground, that we didn't ask you to complete a recognised trainer qualification in any way, and there isn't really any mandate about what you'll deliver that we can actually control you through to make sure there's a quality output. Just have a go if you feel like it, which is exactly how we kind of treat training to drive in the first place. Just have a go if you feel like it, not necessarily being taught by someone who's got a clue.
But it'll be the examiner's fault anyway when you fail.
The problem with the learners is actually have a go works, and there's
let's have a go work. Yes,
you could question whether, because we tend to, the two seem to mirror each other, don't they? The ADI process and the learner process always seem to be hand in hand, because that's easy. It doesn't mean it's good. And if if we do that and we take that approach, you don't have to have a driving instructor. And I don't mean legally, I mean to be successful. You know, experience and age are the 2 biggest factors. It's not who your ADI is, because otherwise we probably actually get some change. And that's not necessarily because it's not true. You know, maybe the ADI makes a big difference. I'd like to think so. But we don't have the statistics. We don't have the evidence. We don't have the studies. That's where we haven't got the teeth to fight and say, right, the facts are saying this. It always is good enough, and I think that's the biggest thing. You know, a ground up. Let's look at it. Let's swap part 1, part 2 over. They'd still be called part 1, part 2 because that'd be weird otherwise. But let's swap them over, because at the moment the part 1 is pretty pointless. There's no real benefits from it because it's so dissociated from the actual hands-on. Let's teach people to drive stuff. But there are companies out there that not too far from here that are doing blended training and are saying, well, let's actually bring those things together. Let's do more of that. Let's look at that.
To answer your point, Peter, there is a teacher training program. You've got the award in education and training, whether it's level 3, 4 or 5. That's already a nationally Ofqual registered and recognized qualification, and that would massively increase the educator's knowledge. And it might be that in order to have to train somebody to be a driving instructor, you've got to have either level 3 or level 4 or even level 5, which is kind of almost degree style, which is what you said they do in Greece. So there's already a system in place for teacher training, adult teacher training, which is kind of what we're doing. We're not doing we're not doing pedagogy training. It's all andragogy stuff. So it's already in place. So we just got to utilize it.
I don't think it's creating a train-the-trainer qualification specific for the industry. I think a start would be in that criteria to become an ADI trainer, I think you should have a little bit more experience than just deciding
Yep.
to do it as you qualify, because we are allowing people to do it as soon as they qualify now, and because there isn't a criteria really that's robust enough. And any kind of trainer qualification, we can shoot for the moon, but we can also be content to land amongst the stars on some of these things. But just trying to get amongst the stars would be a start, right? So I do think we should require people to have a trainer qualification, so they have some understanding of training processes and psychologies in terms of teaching adult learners. So I think that's really, really important. An interesting question, an interesting point by one of the delegates here, that they agree as a PDI, they're going through that process, especially if you've been in any other walk of life, coming to driving instruction when you've had training in other areas and other vocations, and you come to this. I don't want to say, but it's almost embarrassing, isn't it, when you realise the weaknesses in that system. And some PDIs coming from other areas where they've had loads of CPD and loads of quality training delivered by qualified, experienced trainers must be going, what the hell is this? Why am I paying £3,000 for somebody who only qualified 3 months before me and doesn't seem to have any kind of formal training program for me? And it's very focused on just me passing tests, not what I'm going to do when I'm actually delivering training. So it is, it's a real problem that if we don't solve, we're just going to carry on seeing the same outputs in terms of pupils, not just in terms of PDIs and what they get in terms of return on investment for their what they paid for their training, and struggling when they get out there as a trainer as well. Another panelist also makes a good point. Is there any evidence that ADIs are better than mum and dad? Sadly, as Chris was talking about, that's one of the problems. There hasn't been, or for a very long time, a massive intensive study that really looks at that. Peter, did you want to interject on that?
Yeah, I was only going to answer that in an easy manner and not nearly as eloquently as you would have said it, Carly. But the short answer to, I think it was Graham that asked the question, is there any evidence? Not really. Anecdotal evidence says that mum and dad are just as good as ADI. But the reason for that, of course, is nothing to do with qualifications. Mum and dad will give their little darling 100, 200, 300 hours training, but they're not going to pay an ADI for that type of training. Now, whether they need that amount or not, when they turn up at a test in their own car, very often, sometimes in the driving school car, and it makes it look really good, they've had loads of road experience. And that's where I got to my bit early on, where I thought we should have a more holistic view on a driving test. Right, because the person can drive or can they not, right? Instead of all this messing about with the silly bits. But the short answer is there's no real evidence, as you said, Carly. Not there are some stats that we see now and again that say that something like 6% turn up in their own car, but actually their pass rate's quite good. But only because they drive much more miles and hours than they ever would with any driving instructor.
But we're still focusing on the test being the test, not the success afterwards.
Test results.
Exactly. That's right.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
I was just trying to answer Graham's question. That was it. Yeah.
No, and if you talk to Sean Hellman and people like that, they'll say one of the difficulties is proving the worth of the pre-test driving regime. However, I do believe that if we work to improve that pre-test regime and go to a more modular standard with more competencies being proved before test, we would start to build a bigger case for ADIs. No, but we'd also have to improve the quality of ADI training and therefore their output to get to that standard as well. But one of the biggest things I'd like to see is an overall consultation on how we learn to drive in the UK, because we've had that in rider training, albeit sadly, Mark, they kind of ignored the results of it because there was a big consultation in 2017. But we haven't really had anything for a while in the world of driver training.
Carly, if people don't know what they're supposed to be practicing, what exactly are they practicing? And how are they going to know if they got it right? That felt really good, or no, that wasn't quite right. I've got to try it slightly differently. And if people hadn't got a firm grasp of the machine, the theory, all the other bits and pieces, it's all around mum and dad saying, "Oh, you're okay here," and they'll probably get through the test because they're not really going anywhere terribly exciting. I'm thinking of the test centre in Lyon, the Solent, the Fosgene goes 40 miles an hour. the idea of having sort of special graduation for manoeuvres. I mean, manoeuvres are bent metal and insurance. Everything else is potential death. Now, we need a proper way of training trainers. You're absolutely right, and they have to be knowledgeable. Now, I was so when I first joined the DIA, road fatalities were about 1,750, and that was, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. They're still 1,750, and we got all the automatic, autonomous driving and the this, that, and the other steering and predictive braking, all the other stuff. There's still 1,750, and it is down to the driver. And if the driver doesn't understand what's going on, doesn't understand the consequences, having they're not properly educated, and properly explained to them, why are they going to pay any attention? It's no good just saying, well, just do as you're told because I say so. They're not going to buy into that. I had a lad, he had been stopped doing 61 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. And he was absolutely convinced that was fine. And he's the most god-awful driver. And he got a shocking report going back. So, I mean, if he shows that in court, then he probably won't get a license until he's about 105. That probably wouldn't be quite such a bad thing. But you're never going to stop stupid people driving cars. You're never going to stop stupid people driving forklifts. But the point about this is it's a solitary occupation. Everything else that you do, you've got colleagues, you've got bosses, you've got health and safety officials, you've got all sorts of people saying, hey, look, don't do that. Do that again, pal, you're fired. It doesn't happen in cars. It doesn't happen on motorbikes. It is a solitary occupation, and that is probably the biggest problem we've got, and I have no idea how to solve it beyond having periodic retesting, because then you've got to maintain your core levels of competency. They're going to be nothing like as good as I'd like to see, and that probably goes for all of us. But at least they're not going to be as god awful as some of the stuff we see on the roads every day.
Thanks for that, Kevin. I think that's a very interesting point. Well, the other thing that could change all of that is what some people would see as the advent of AVs, autonomous vehicles, taking the human element out of it. But then we've got a whole other debate, which we might have soon in this, about the advent of AVs. And actually, although they are designed to take the human element out of them, we will still have to have training, licensing and testing for the human being. Just to wrap up now, because obviously we're just slightly over time, any last thoughts from all of you gentlemen on the panel there and our delegates tonight as well in the chat? Any last thoughts on anything we haven't said yet about things that really should be on any agenda of any new government when it comes to driver rider training, testing or licensing? So Mark, throw it open to you quickly.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's anything more specific than what we've talked about. But I guess the one thing I would ask people to do is to actually talk to their their candidates about putting driver and rider training on the agenda.
Yeah.
And making sure the political parties actually start talking about it, because they don't.
Unless there is an issue with their constituency, and then we'll get a letter from an MP. And obviously, we've just had a private members bill attempt to get GDL through from a shadow transport secretary, which again has not happened. But exactly, even one of the biggest manifesto things we'd like to see is the inclusion of conversation about driver and rider training and testing in any manifesto.
Absolutely.
And that's what the survey is about, and that's what writing a manifesto for our industry is about. We'll try and do in the next week. That it's at least, hey, we're here. Could you just listen to some of these people because they really know what they're talking about? Because often, as we know from the advisory groups that we sit in at DFT level, there's a lot of people speaking loudly that don't have an idea, that aren't at the coalface, but they're gonna try and have their influence, and sometimes they do have their influence, sadly. And I'm talking about police and fire and local road safety officers who don't teach people how to drive or ride, yet they've been influencing policy around these things, or they've been saying it's not so much about the teach people to drive or ride. It's about all the other stuff. So give us a load of money to go out in a van with a virtual reality headset and talk about crashes again, or do another video about people being pulled out of cars by firemen. So it's, we have all these distractions going on from them listening to people who aren't at the coalface of where the real problems occur and where the solutions could actually occur better as well. So yeah, I think getting it on the agenda at all would be great. Peter, back to you. What do you think? Anything we haven't raised as a thing that really...
I think it's been a good conversation all night. I thought it's went very well, to be honest. The only little thing that I think that I like what Kevin has to say about, you know, extra testing. But I wonder, Kevin, would you be, as an initial thought, would you be interested in allowing some sort of graduated licensing? Every time a person has to renew their photograph on their license, they have to take a theory test. Now, another argument would be they'll only read the highway code, but it'll be the first time in 10 years. And that might be easier to achieve than trying to get everybody a driving test every 10 years. Just a thought.
I think that's a good idea. I'd like to see them all take an eyesight test too.
Yeah, I'd go with that, yeah.
Application license time and photo card renewal. And come 70, you've got to have a medical too.
I'd agree, because I think that people think that what we're asking in terms of retesting is going to be really onerous. That's where you immediately get the barriers going up. Oh, we can't do that because it's going to be really unwieldy and really resource driven. But actually, some of our it could be a theory test. Even a theory test would be an improvement, and that's not massively resource intensive in terms of how the technology is advanced for doing self-marking theory testing.
The argument I've had from some very senior people is, oh, they'd only read the highway code, but it'll be the first time they've done it in goodness knows how many years. That's got to be a step in the right direction. Thanks, Kevin.
Chris, what are your kind of last thoughts in terms of what should be included in the manifesto?
Two things just to respond to what Peter and Kevin were saying. I'd like to see insurance companies step up, because then we don't need the government. Because insurance companies could actually say, we need an eyesight certificate to insure you. Job done, not a problem. And
theory tested to keep your policy current.
Discount, for various things. Let's do that. But I'm going to go for the big one. I want to be able to complain about the DVSA to someone that's not the DVSA, because if you send that letter to the MP, we've done it lots recently. Check out the DITC website. You send it to them, to whoever, it gets forwarded to the desk of Loveday Rider, if you're lucky, normally someone else, who sends you the same response they've sent to everyone else, saying that we're not listening to what you're saying, but thank you for the paper. It's keeping us warm in the office. And that's it. There is no above. We don't get to that point. Well, and when they're feeling miserable things.
You might not, but obviously I speak to DFT quite a lot, so does Peter as well. But we were invited to a review session the other week, but they didn't almost make it impossible, didn't they, Peter, for us to attend? So they asked us
but it didn't work.
They instituted a meeting with an independent facilitator of all DVSA stakeholders, and they gave us very little notice of the meeting, and then said it would be best to go back to a face-to-face format of that meeting, to which most people actually said they couldn't make it. So we got a very strange makeup of stakeholders in that meeting that I was in. But luckily they did allow us to go in by teleconference, and we were able to at least say some of the things. And Loveday was sat there listening to it, but we were able to say, look, and I think Peter remembers, I literally, once we'd listened to one particular stakeholder who I would very much question why they were there, but make a pitch for their own business most of the time they're on there. We kind of just got to, myself and Peter, the ones who really had probably the most experience of working with DVSA directly, we had to concentrate down what we wanted to feed back. And I think we were a bit more brutal because we had less time. We were like, right, let's get it in. And we were like, stop doing this, don't do that, you're rubbish at that, I don't know why you do that, you need to let other people do that, start doing this. And this should be your focus, and that's what we did in that.
Basically, what we said was start concentrating on your core business and never mind all the other things that you're dabbling about, not being very good at. That's the kind of short way of putting it.
And that highlights one of my 26 points, which is compulsory association membership, which I'm sure you'll both be totally against. But
Crazy idea.
Well, funny enough, and this is being honest, I'm sure Carly would back me up here. We never mention that at all. We never talk about that at all. To these, you know, if people are going to join, they're going to join, and that's fantastic. But we try not to ever use that as a tool that might help.
But if they do want to institute, like they do in the medical world where I came from, where doctors compulsorily have to have a separate indemnity to the Crown, so they have to have professional indemnity and public liability separate to what the Crown gives them, I would be for that, because MSA and us, we'd be fine, because you'd have to join MSA or DIA then.
Well, one or the other. Yeah, you have to do something. Yeah.
Yeah. But we have given that feedback, but there should be more feedback mechanisms. We sometimes get to meet with the DVSA board, but it seems like very much a PR exercise by the board. Like, we're here to listen, but we don't really ever see the results of that listening. So definitely a feedback loop that was a bit more transparent. And there are complaints procedures and there are places you can go to complain about government agencies. But again, that's not very clear. It's a little bit like when I deal with tribunals. One of the things we wanted to change in the tribunals and appeals process and investigations was, for years, DVSA didn't make it clear to people they had a right to representation and that they could use their national association for that. We actually had to fight quite hard, didn't we, Peter, for the very practical measure of adding it to the letter that ADIs receive when they are about to be struck off the register, that they have the right to be represented by their ADI association. God, that was a fight to just get a couple of lines in. And I think
the lines in. Yeah.
I think the only thing that triggered it in the end was me raising the spectre that if they didn't do something like this, they could face some kind of civil rights breach case, because they are contravening civil rights by not extending the right to representation to people. So I think, you know, there's things that the manifesto and political parties won't change in terms of the DVSA, but getting political parties and getting people who make policy and are their bosses, i.e. the ministers, to realise what are the problems with the regulator is pretty important, as well as what goes in a manifesto in my book. Kevin, just a quick one from you. What have we missed, or what are the big ticket things that you really do want to see in this?
Well, autonomous vehicles are just ridiculous. So we can get rid of them completely. The government should not be spending a penny on autonomous vehicles. If it's going to spend a penny on autonomous anything, look at autonomous trains, because they're costing us an absolute fortune.
Okay.
We can get rid of train drivers. They're on rails. That train driver makes the machine go forwards or backwards and opens and closes the doors. For that, he gets paid, I don't know, 60, 70 grand a year.
Yeah.
But
one of our panelists also said that maybe having CPD, which goes back to the retesting every 10 years, having CPD for, CPC for drivers every 10 years. The other big one that we haven't mentioned that I am going to put in any manifesto piece that we produce is revisit the highway code's most recent changes, because I think they've led to more risks than they have mitigated risks. And it was interesting to see PACS come out, or was it RAC Foundation come out and say that, whilst I'm kind of a little bit cynical of that, because they were very quiet in a meeting we had about the highway code changes when they were launched, that DVSA and DFT had with a group of stakeholders. I was like one of the lone voices, probably Peter again, was saying, we think you've made some mistakes with this. People at RSA Foundation were actually saying, no, I think you've done a good launch, and I think there's some great stuff in there. They came out the other day and said, actually, we need to review what the changes were, because they are creating more risk, i.e. telling pedestrians, it's all right, go to the corner of a junction, step out into the road. It's the driver who has to be responsible for that, without actually making sure drivers have got that message, but more importantly, just increasing risk for everybody with that kind of change. So I think that's another big ticket item that I'd want to see in any manifesto.
Carly, as far as that is concerned, the educational message that should be going out to road users is, you know, if you're a pedestrian, if you're a cyclist, if you're a motorcyclist, if anything goes wrong, you're coming second. No ifs, no buts, no maybes. And until and unless we can instill a sense, almost of fear, of not so much cars, to a greater extent vans, but trucks. When I get all my students up in a truck and get them to talk to the truck drivers, they're all a bit surprised.
Yeah, we did say that in the feedback. We said that the communications campaign that accompanied those changes to the Highways Code was completely insufficient, and also and what it conveyed was to cyclists, you can do what you want, and everybody has to watch out for you. And that's how they took it. We know the cyclists were all over Facebook just after that, almost going, no, you drivers have to look out for us. We can ride where we want. And that wasn't actually what it was meant to be. And the same with pedestrians. So we need to say, the next time we talk about that topic, it needs to be, no one can abdicate their responsibility for their own safety to another party. We all have to look out for each other, but don't assume someone will assume responsibility for you. Your safest route is to make sure that you are safe and we keep each other safe as well. I'm gonna call it, simply because I know we're massively over time and people have got other things to be doing this evening. I am so grateful to my panelists for sparing the time at very short notice on this really important issue tonight. We've had a few less delegates we normally have on this call, but that's our fault for doing a very last minute thing. But I did want to get this in before we start to write a proper manifesto document. Please keep continuing to give your views to the survey as well, so we have as many voices as we can in whatever we say to any incoming government or any political party on this matter. But I hope you found this useful. This is being recorded, so we will be packaging it up and sending it out through all our normal channels. Chris, I assume, and Peter as well, you can get it out to your memberships as well. I think it'd be quite important in stimulating them having their voices as well. And hopefully, at the very least, we might just see something in some party's manifesto or some revision or something in their policy when they come to power that actually talks about our world. Because if they've got any concern for public safety, never mind just road safety, they need to focus on one of the most Cinderella areas, but one of the most important areas of public safety. So thanks, everybody. I hope you have a very safe evening, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks very much, Carly.
Thanks, guys. Bye.